I have to confess at the outset that while my vehicle is words, I don't really believe anything I say, because the nature of my work concerns the spaces between the words rather than the words themselves. For I'm dealing with an area, a realm of human existence that is basically not conceptual. And I'm faced with the predicament of trying to convey a non-conceptual realm through concept. So I must ask you at the outset to take my words with a grain of salt. If you don't like them, don't worry about them. They will pass quickly. In order to understand the stages of life and ultimately the process of dying, one has to have a context in which to understand these things. And the context usually is defined as what is the meaning of it? What am I doing here on earth? Because having an understanding of one's function or purpose makes one understand whether some process that's going on in transformation is functional or dysfunctional, whether or not it's useful or not. I think none of us are so naive at this point, certainly not in this gathering of professionals and people related in related fields. None of us are so naive as to think that only that which gives pleasure is useful. I think most of you now have found through your own experiences that there is incredible growth through suffering. That doesn't mean that we would go around programming suffering into people's lives. We don't give suffering 101. And yet, when we look back at our own lives, we see some of the most profound changes occurred at the times of the most intense suffering. And the nature of the suffering is that we are confronting a situation which is dissonant or disparate from the model we have of how reality ought to be. And that's really what the cause of suffering is. The cause of suffering is this place in your mind that's defining how you think it ought to be. So if you think things should be a certain way and they're not, then there's a discomfort and you suffer. And a lot of what our suffering has been is not due to the actual characteristics of the situation, but to the way in which we perceive the situation. And that perception is based on our contextual understanding of who we are and what we're doing here. So that I must delve a little bit more into the philosophical underpinnings of your and my existence for us to have an appreciation of what the seasons of our lives, particular reference to dying, how to perceive them, how to understand them in a useful way. I'll paint a scenario, just give you a little example of what I went through in some of my processing. I'm in Benares, the city of dying in India. In the Hindu religion, the highest way in which you can die is to die in Benares. And when you die in Benares, your body gets burned at the burning ghat, and the bones and ashes get thrown into the Ganges River. And through that simple act, you are spiritually freed, and we'll talk a minute about what that might be about. The result of that belief system is that Benares is full of people dying. And most of these people have no money whatsoever. They are beggars at the most extreme states of survival. Many of them are lepers. They have a loincloth, man or woman, just a loincloth, and maybe a begging bowl. Many of them have advanced states of cancer. Many of them are just skin and bones. They are dragging themselves through the streets. And often on their loincloth there is a little sack which contains the money necessary for the wood for their funeral pyre. Now, if you think of yourself as a human being and think of them as a human being and empathize for a moment with their predicament, when I first came to Benares, when I went out in the streets, I was in a very open space, and when I looked at these people, I experienced such horror, I couldn't really handle it at all. And I went back to my hotel room, and I am somewhat embarrassed to admit, I literally climbed under the bed. I hid under the bed, just in horror of the situation. Because I walked through the streets with my American Express traveler's checks in my pocket, with my security, with my ticket back to affluent America, and I was facing these other human beings in the extreme state of need and poverty. And my pity was more than I could handle. Subsequent to that, I met my spiritual teacher, and my whole life took a different turn, and I ended up living in a temple, studying Hindu philosophy, doing deep meditation, hatha yoga, so on. And I began to understand a different context about what life and death was about. And now, about 6 or 8 months later, I found myself in Benares again. And I walked through the streets, and this time, it was an entirely different experience for me. For when I looked into the eyes of these people, I saw in them not what I expected to see in the past, not self-pity, not frustration, not humiliation, not anger, not pleading. They had a look in their eyes of fulfillment. And then I noticed something else in their eyes that I could hardly believe. They were looking at me with pity. They were pitying me, healthy, fat, solid American me. These people in the last stages of life were pitying me. And I understood that from their belief system, they were pitying me because I was merely this wanderer wandering through life, not knowing where I was going or where I was coming from. They knew their place, they were secure in their place, they were fulfilled in what they were about to do, and they knew that I was wandering in despair and I would never find, and they just felt sorry that I was so lost. And I had trained enough so that I could see it from their point of view, and I ended up feeling self-pity. Now, to me, that's an example of how a belief system can be so strong that it can take what could be called a sad tune and make it into a happy tune. It can change the entire meaning of a situation. In the villages in India where I live, quite a bit of the time, there are many beings who make 2, 3, 4 rupees a day. That's 40, 60 cents a day. And they have one meal a day, and they live maybe under a railroad bridge or crowded together. Not optimum living conditions, but sometimes when I look at their faces, I experience a quality of their being that seems more in tune or in harmony with